Shooting YouTube videos, at least this talking head portion, has always been a little bit of a laborious task for me, particularly working in smaller spaces with very little time to dedicate to it when I'm working full time or I'm on paid shoots, setting up camera equipment, lights and microphones, and finding interesting angles with good lighting I've found difficult, particularly when I've been in very small office spaces. I'm about to move into London, into a flat, which should give me a little bit more room and make this process just that bit easier for me, but today I wanted to do a deep dive into all of the equipment that I use when shooting my YouTube content and discuss whether I'd recommend it or not. Let's get into it. I am about to move into a flat in London, which should give me a lot more room and should make this process of making these videos much easier. But today I wanted to just give a look into all of the equipment that I use when I shoot my YouTube content and discuss whether or not I would recommend it. Starting off with one of the most important aspects of my setup, the camera. And the camera that I use now to shoot all of my YouTube content is the Sony FX30. Now, I've been using this camera for my YouTube content for a little over a year now, and I think that this was the best purchase that I made for the channel. Going from a Pocket 6K Pro, which was a very manual and very hands-on camera, to the FX30, which has autofocus and in-body stabilization, has just made the process so much easier. Particularly for in-studio A-roll shots like this one, using the autofocus has been great, and even though I often use a Canon EF lens with an adapter, which I will get into shortly, the autofocus on this FX30 has been pretty faultless. A few of my favorite features are the ability to load custom LUTs, so I have a false color LUT loaded on here, which really helps me to nail the exposure of my skin tones in these studio shots, and I also have some film emulation LUTs that allow me to preview in camera exactly what the final image is going to look like. With it also being a Super 35 6K sensor that shoots in 4K, it has the ability to use clear image zoom, which effectively extends the zoom range of my lenses without any loss in quality, still using that full 4K portion of the sensor. And finally, I just love the image quality of this thing. In reality, the majority of modern day cameras like this one will have similar specs, and only the color science and usability will be a big difference, but that's also something that you can easily adjust when color grading. The S-Log3 image has super high dynamic range, the footage is sharp without being too clinically sharp in my opinion, and best of all, it's all for a very budget-friendly price in the grand scheme of things when compared to other cinema or mirrorless body cameras. From the lens front, for the majority of the last year, I've actually used the Sigma Art 18-35 f1.8 EF mount lens. I'm adapting that using the Sigma MC11 EF to E mount adapter. I was a little skeptical at first when deciding to go the adapted route, but I already had this lens for the Pocket 6K Pro, and so it made sense for me. And surprisingly, this lens actually works really well from an autofocus perspective. And whilst it's maybe only 95% as good as a native Sony lens, for what I do, that is more than enough. For a lot of my B-roll shots, I'll either use the Sigma 18-35, or I have actually recently started using the Vivitar 58mm macro lens quite a lot. I use this lens to scan all of my film at home, but it works really well adapted to the FX30 for video work, and I use it for a lot of the static detail B-roll shots that I'll capture, particularly when talking about products or looking at film negatives. I also have a fairly budget-friendly Sony 18-105 f4 power zoom lens. I've used this a couple of times just on more run and gun scenarios, and it's a useful little lens to throw on and take around anywhere, with it being pretty light and pretty durable. With that also being a Sony branded lens, the active stabilization mode on the FX30 works incredibly well, making it great for capturing B-roll when out and about. And then I've also recently picked up the Sigma 10-18 f2.8 art lens, and this is largely going to be used for my real estate work, but I do quite often like to go for that slightly wider look on my YouTube talking head videos. I'm actually using it right now, so you can judge for yourself how it looks. My first impressions are that it's pretty good, it's super sharp, a very wide angle view, and I think it'll be a very useful lens going forwards. I do then also have another camera that I use, and particularly recently have begun to use quite a lot, and that is the DJI Osmo Pocket 3. I recently did a first impressions video, so I'll link that down below, and I won't go into too much detail in this one, but I've begun using this camera out on photo trips as an easy way to vlog and to document the scenes which I'm taking images of. It's a super compact little camera that I can easily connect the wireless DJI mic to. It stabilizes the footage super well, and it provides a fairly good and flexible image when using the D-Log-M profile. The camera is a little bit over sharpened for my liking, and it's never going to give the same quality as something like my FX30, but I do love just how easy it is to use and how portable it is to take around with me. So let's move on from the camera systems and lenses that I use, and let's talk about audio. For my microphones, I have a little bit of gear acquisition syndrome, I must admit, and I probably have more than I need, but I'll only go into detail about the main ones that I use, and I will just mention some of the other mics that I have used in videos. My main studio microphone that I use the majority of the time and that I'm using right now is the Sennheiser MKE 600, and I think for the price, this thing really does sound great. I tend to run this via XLR into the Zoom H4n or directly into my Mac via a USB audio interface, but I do also like that I could use this via battery power directly into my Sony FX30 3.5mm audio jack if I wanted to. When out on shoots, I tend to use the Rode Wireless Pro system, either with the Rode Lav or just directly into the Wireless Pro transmitter, which I just clipped myself, or when I'm using the DJI Osmo Pocket 3, I obviously use the DJI mic transmitter, which came with the Pocket 3 Creator combo. All of these mics I have loved using and I would personally recommend to anybody. Having poor quality sound is probably one of the most noticeable things when watching a YouTube video, and so I'd always recommend investing into good audio equipment. Some previous mics that I have used and still do occasionally are the Behringer XM8500, the Rode PodMic, and also the Rode NTG1. All have slightly different sounds, but I do enjoy using all of them, and honestly, these days I tend to just pick up whatever mic I'm feeling like using on that particular day. Hence, this one, the Sennheiser, is what I'm using today. Let's now move into talking about the lighting that I use. From a lighting perspective, I have a few main lights that I use. For these talking headshots, I'll either use the Godox SL60W, which was my first video light and is a great budget option for beginners, or for when I'm shooting in smaller spaces, I tend to use the Amaran 60D, which is a super compact and small 60-watt light, which can also be powered by bigger NPF batteries, allowing me to use it cable-free if I wanted to. One of those two lights tends to be my key light. I'm never having to massively fight with sunlight, so I don't need a 300-watt light, and if I have the space, I will use the other one of those two as a hair or rim light, ideally. I predominantly use this quick setup softbox from SmallRig as my key light modifier, just as it's a pretty small profile, and the really quick mechanism to set up and pack down is so much more useful than having to lift up each individual wire on the softbox. I do also have a SmallRig lantern modifier, which is pretty quick to set up and pack down as well, and I use this more so for portraits in my photo work, but I have also previously used it as my key light modifier for these videos. I then have a couple of smaller lights which I will sometimes use. One that I use in pretty much every video is this cheap little sunset lamp that is behind me. I tend to fire it at my background just like that, and it provides a pretty nice orange circle, or I can use other colors if I wanted to, and it just gives a little bit of visual interest. I love this little thing, and I've actually used it on some photo shoots in the past, so if you're interested in seeing how that works, I'll leave a link to that in the description also. I then have a fairly inexpensive light bar, which I picked up off Amazon. This thing is a Hagibi's light wand. It has 9 different colors and can adjust from 3200 Kelvin to 6500 Kelvin. It's honestly pretty useful as a hair light sometimes, and it's rechargeable via micro USB and can be controlled via a little remote, so it's a very small profile when it is set up. I do, however, often forget to recharge it, and so I'll come to use it and find out that it's out of charge, and that either delays the whole process or I have to just use a different light. But on the whole, still a pretty useful light bar. And then finally, I also have a super cheap SmallRig cube light. This is the P108 RGB video light, which I will sometimes just stick somewhere in my setup to give me a little pop of color, or if I need to add some extra light to the background. Lighting stands wise, I just use either sturdier metal light stands, or if I can in the space that I'm in, I'll use C stands to hold up my lights. I also have some smaller and more portable light stands and tripods, which I'll sometimes use to hold the much smaller lights, like the SmallRig cube or the Hagibi's light bar. If you're only able to pick up one light stand though to start off with, I'd always recommend a C stand or a sturdier metal light stand like these ones that I have from Newer. And that's pretty much it for lighting. So let's move on to the more, I guess, miscellaneous items that I use when I'm in a recording session like this. Probably my most used tool, at least in the last year, is these SmallRig Magic Arms with super clamps. I've found so many useful applications for these that just make life so much easier when shooting, both on my YouTube stuff and in my professional day-to-day life. I use one to clamp a monitor to my home film scanning setup 100% of the time. When I'm shooting YouTube content, I'll often clamp one to a light stand or even my desk or my tripod as it is right now, and I'll have my shotgun mic attached to it so that I can get it nice and close to me when I'm talking. I clamp it to a C stand when I have my microphone booth boomed overhead, and I'll screw my Zoom recorder into it so that it's neatly attached right below the microphone. You can clamp it to something in the background and use a small light attached to it. There's really so many uses for these things, and I'm still finding more and more every time that I have a paid shoot or I create this YouTube content, and so I really cannot recommend them enough. One thing that I've used on the majority of my YouTube shoots actually since starting, and that has made my life so much easier, is this DesView T3 teleprompter. I attach this to the front of my lens via step-up rings, and I use it for all of my talking head YouTube audio stuff, and if I didn't, I would probably be recording for 5 times as long as I normally do. I write a pretty detailed script out if I can, and then I use Prompt Smart Pro, an app on my phone, to read this off the mirrored teleprompter. And normally, unless I stumble over my words, which I still do quite a lot, I only have to read each sentence or paragraph once or twice most times. This has streamlined my process probably more than any other item, and is my favorite thing that I use for all of these videos. I did, however, attempt to clean it once just with a cloth, and it seemed to completely mess up the coating or something on here, so it's a little difficult to read now. It sometimes shows up a little bit in the video, but it doesn't seem to have a massive effect on the image quality. It's only when using a wider lens like this, but I probably should pick up a replacement at some point in the future. I should also add that when shooting with a wide angle lens like this Sigma 10-18, I can't go as wide as I'd sometimes like, as it does create a vignette in the corner of the image where the teleprompter blocks the view. So I'm probably at about 13-14mm right now, as opposed to going to the full 10mm wide. This teleprompter also is as wide as the camera, and so it does mean that I can't actually see my screen right now when I'm recording myself. And so I do actually like to use an app on my iPad to monitor what I'm recording, and that app is the Monitor and Control app by Sony, and this is honestly incredible. It works so brilliantly with my FX30. I can monitor all of my settings, exposure, focus points, I can change what LUTs I'm monitoring with, I can stop and start recording from the app, and it's all wirelessly connected to my iPad via Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, meaning that if I want to adjust some lighting in the background or the position of something in the frame, I can do so in real time whilst viewing the preview on a 12-inch handheld screen. There is a tiny amount of latency, so you couldn't use this as a focus puller in a professional setting or anything like that, but for monitoring a YouTube talking head video, it's great. And that's pretty much everything that I use to shoot my YouTube videos. At least that's everything that I can think of right now, and that's definitely everything that I'll use in all of my video shoots. It's a pretty extensive list, but it all has a place, and the vast majority of it makes my life just so much easier when shooting this type of content. As I said, I'm moving into a new space soon in London, and that should give me just a whole lot more room and freedom to make these videos, and all of these products that I've mentioned today will absolutely be coming with me and will be utilized there. That is going to be all for this one though. I do hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. Please do leave me a like if you enjoyed the video, and maybe consider subscribing if you want to see any more of my content going forward. Stay safe everyone, stay happy, and I'll see you in the next one.